for someone who is attending a fitness class, and they've just done a bunch of squats and presses, maybe did a Metcon, would you say to do these exercises before or after your workout, or does it matter?
I feel like I wrote a blog post once, like CrossFit needs a glute wad, but if they just did like and I don't know if you do it before, it's going to affect because glute activation is popular, but glute activation is low load activation. The whole point is quality, not quantity. You could do 100, but you stop at 10. You're looking for quality.
Yeah.
You're not fatiguing yourself. With this, you are fatigued. Like, this is an actual workout, but yeah, if they threw in some hip thrusts, but you could decrease volume of certain things and add volume in other things.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, it
just
sounds like you could do like activation in the beginning, something easy, and on the back end, that's
my
when you just
clients
burn
don't
it out.
even really do activation though, because you're going to get it in the workout. So I don't have them do all this activation stuff. I have them go into deep ranges of motion for stretching, because there's studies on this. The dynamic warm up with like lunges and things those get you prepared. Those improve performance, whereas the short length stuff don't. Like, all the glute activation stuff doesn't increase sprinting times like lunges and stuff do, because you want to prepare the muscle for longer ranges. So I just don't do those in the warm up. But a lot of powerlifters like to do that, I know, and it makes them feel better. A lot of these powerlifters are warming up for 45 minutes, but I think the whole goal is to not have to do.
Been there.
Yeah, to get your body feeling better.
Sucks.
But when you're so focused on squats and deads, that's
Everything's so tight. Yeah.
yeah.
So speaking of, you're mentioning that how it can help out with aspects of functional fitness, so to speak. So if you're doing hip thrusts, you're working on terminal hip extension. You talked about how that can help with like the lockout of a deadlift. That's why one of the reasons that guy probably hit a new PR. But then a second ago, you just mentioned sprinting. And so if you're running a full speed sprint, then terminal hip extension becomes really, really important. So someone that's trying to get faster, if you're a football player or soccer player, someone that actually is going to be running full speed, I feel like hip thrusts are probably really important for those athletes.
So that's what kind of sparked my desire to want to get a PhD. We did all the hip thrusts off that Scorcher and in my gym, and I had probably of those 2 years, about 10 different clients that would come to me. Now, none of these were sprinters; they were all runners, and not all competitive runners. They were like just people who would run, but they knew their times. They'd work out with me for a couple months. They wouldn't run at all. Then they'd go one weekend for a run, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, I smoked my best 2-mile time, and I haven't done any running." And they'd go, "It's the hip thrust." Well, I started every workout out with hip thrust, because that was the center. That was like my gym had one, and that's what made me unique. And that's what got me a lot of clients right off the bat. I had so many clients from women would just love that and go, tell their friends. I remember one client got 12 people on her own to train with me. So I'd say, why do you think it's the hip thrust? We do everything. We do Bulgarian split squats. We do squats, deadlifts, lunges, step-ups, Romanian deadlifts, back extensions, reverse hypers, you name it. We do all these things. Why do you think it's the hip thrust? Well, I feel my glutes working on the ground, kind of like how I do with that.
Yeah.
So that's why I would lay at night and think like, what's the difference between a squat and a hip thrust? And I remember trying to explain it back in the day before I understood biomechanics. Really, they just have different hip extension torque angle curves. I didn't know how to say that back then, but the curves are different. You have different ranges of motion, but the hip thrust is harder through more of the range of motion, especially at the top. So yes, I do believe that it transfers well to sprinting, but I also believe that the hamstrings are the most important muscle group for sprinting. There's a few studies on hip thrust right now, and the research is equivocal, but this is why it's good to learn about research, because you can start looking at them. My study showed acceleration improvements from hip thrusts, but not from front squats. But front squats showed vertical jump improvements, but not hip thrusts. Specificity, right? It makes sense. 2 other papers were published showing heavy hip thrusts alone did not improve sprint performance. But here's what I say about that. Like, I came up with this hypothesis with that Scorcher, and you feel, if you've done both of them, you feel that way more range, way more stretch on the hamstrings, way more range of motion. But also, these protocols didn't have a tapering period. And that's what a lot of research, you look at a lot of this research, like, it doesn't mimic what we do as personal trainers. it's hard. Research is hard to duplicate things. So, you know, Mike, if you're my trainer and you're like, okay, we're going to start giving you some exercises, you're not like, okay, Bret, day one, today we're going to max out, you know, and till you're grinding things out, you know, and then I'm going to take your 1 rep max and I'm going to take 85% of your 1 RM and I'm going to give you 5 sets of 5, 3 days a week for 6 straight weeks. Then the following Monday, I'm going to retest you on some things. We think about it, we throw these people in and crush them.
Yeah.
And I don't do that with my clients. I get the, how's this feel? Body weight. Okay, I'm going to add 65 pounds. How's that feel?
Yeah.
Okay, we're doing high reps, sets of this. They're never in this like stressed out, like, you know, and when you go so heavy, you don't always feel the glutes working much. And you never got into that, I don't know. It doesn't always mimic what we do in the weight room, what we do as personal trainers. But also you need a tapering period. You know, if you work with Olympic athletes and to peak at a certain time, you always know you have to taper. So anyway, so that's why you have to, you know, think about if we relied on research to tell you how to train for the CrossFit Games, what would we have? You have to rely on anecdotes. You have to.
Right.
That's why talking to the that's why coaches like talking to other coaches, and athletes like talking to other athletes. You don't just go by research. Research is important. But I'm so sick of coaches that don't respect research and researchers that don't respect anecdotes. They're both wrong. We have knowledge out there and we can gain it. We can gain it through a lot of ways.
When you're conducting the research on, you know, a specific movement, where do you kind of draw the line on how long we're testing this? Because if I practice the hip thruster for 8 weeks, 3 times a week, I'm going to get a lot stronger in hip thrusting just by practicing the movement versus am I really getting stronger? Or you know,
At other things?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So this is always, as a researcher, you have to go, okay, the longer the study, the better, the more legit, right? The more valid. But you also risk dropouts. So you're like, I don't want dropouts. Like we don't have like these nutrition studies where we have, you know, 600 subjects, and strength and conditioning studies are like usually like, you know, 20 subjects, 2 groups of like 10 or something, you know.
Right.
And I wish we had more, but it's not easy, and it's hard. You know, you got to have strength coaches and the people that just show up at the gym. Training when you have cross-sectional studies, like I'm going to do an EMG study, that's easy. The people come once or twice and you do some stuff and then they leave, then you're done with collecting data. When it's a training study, they have to come for pre-testing, 8 weeks of training, and then maybe a week or 2 of post-testing. So you have dropouts, and it's the worst. They'll drop out like 1 week before their data collection, and you're like, and for some stupid reason, you're like. So that's the rub. You got to go, okay, that's why I like 6-week studies, but it's not enough time really.
Yeah,
but here's what's crazy. So I conducted a study on identical twins for my PhD thesis. So that's cool. They're identical twins.
That's rare to get a strength and conditioning study with twins, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Very rare. I should publish it. I don't know why I have all these unpublished things. I want to acquire the knowledge for myself so I can be a better coach. And then I don't like the publishing route. So I don't like
42 papers later.
It's not it's not paying enough, I guess.
I'm not I don't have publish or perish. I'm not a professor. I'm not a research professor. I don't have
any incentives to spend that amount of time doing it.
Right.
So anyway, here's what was cool. This is where I was like, man, I could probably be a better personal trainer. I had the stopwatch. I did 2-minute rest times. Like we'd be talking in between sets. 30 seconds prior, I'd be like, okay, all right, you get ready. 30 more seconds. Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay, go. So we did strict rest periods. I've never done that and then even after that, I don't. So we probably do too much rambling in between sets, too much rest time. But anyway, that's why I like training groups. I don't get to ramble and get sidetracked like I do with one-on-one. But I also was down on my knee, ensuring parallel every rep, ensuring full lockout on the hip thrust. So one twin did squats, one twin did hip thrusts. And obviously specificity, the squat twin gained a lot more squat strength, the hip thrust twin gained a lot more hip thrust strength. But the hip thrust twin, this is what was so cool for me. So she did her first time squatting, she did 95 pounds, but it was an ugly 95 pounds. But it satisfied the criteria. You know, when you write down the criteria, you don't say it has to look pretty. It's that they have to get below depth and whatever, you know, whatever you say, how you define it. But her knees came in a little bit, and it was just a little wonky, you know. But she got 95 pounds. 6 weeks later, she was hip thrust, and this was a DUP program, and I crushed them. It's funny because after the 6, I think if I would have done a 7th week, they would have injured themselves. So you can push yourself really hard for 6 straight weeks, 3 times a week. So it was 1 day of like medium reps, 1 day of low reps, 1 day of high reps. And at the end of the 6 weeks, she was doing she could do like a 335 pound hip thrust. So she went from 195 to 335 on her hip thrust. But she never squatted once, never did. I mean, obviously she stood up from a chair, but she never practiced the squat movement pattern. I did not have that in the warm up. I picked just lunges. That was their only warm up exercise because I didn't want to throw bridges or squats in there to confound anything. So she had not practiced a squat movement pattern at all. 6 weeks later, she does a squat and hits 135 with the knees out. They didn't cave as much. It was beautiful. She's like sat back and distributed the stress well. And I remember going, holy crap, she went up 40 pounds in 6 weeks on her squat from not even squatting. Now,
Was she doing those hip thrusts with the band around her knees?
No.
No, okay.
Just barbell.
Okay.
Right. Probably even better if she had the bands around her knees.
Yeah.
But a recent study, the study I told you about that showed that it didn't transfer well to sprinting, they measured squat and hip thrust 1 rep max, and these were Japanese collegiate baseball players. They gained 36% increased strength in the hip thrust and 31% increased strength in the squat. So I went and converted it from kilograms to pounds because we're American and need to be different. So